Good afternoon, and welcome to another concept discussion based around my new book, Black, White, and Red All Over. Got an error performing query. Hang on. All right, Black, White, and Red All Over. Facebook is having some issues, but we're going to keep going if we can. All right, concept discussion number 3, the real faces of heroism and terrorism in America. Now, I want to do a special shout out to Mr. Terrence Amen. I'm a fiction writer in this particular go round. I do have some nonfiction works, but there are so many serious things happening in real life that I have been hesitant to come forward. But it so happens that I've written about the issues last year, not knowing that the cover of this book that I eventually chose has bullet holes on it. I had no idea last year that Black athletes, shout out to each and every one of them, who have decided to postpone entertaining people who are indifferent about Black blood being shed down to the street for no reason. I had no idea they'd be willing bullet holes printed on their backs when I made the new cover for this book. If you saw the promo, you'll see the cover that we have today does have bullet holes. I had no idea. But the idea of the nexus of American terrorism is discussed in this book. I just didn't see it manifesting itself in real American life quite the way that it has. Now, let me put out some things immediately. And I prayed a lot about how I'm going to discuss this. And let me complete my shout out to Mr. Terrence Amen, founder of 3U First, a community hero that most of you don't know about, but we're going to talk about heroes that we don't know about in America. And that when we have this whole discussion about who is a hero and who is a terrorist in the American concept, we may need to adjust that just a little bit. Terrence Amen is putting something together that will allow Black people to spend the money they're already spending and yet put it back into the community. So it is important that we highlight Black men who are doing such things that can be helpful to us all, whoever you are in the Black community, or if you're on the side of freedom in general. Put a pin here. The wisdom of George W. Bush was cute to many people in America when it was applied to dark-skinned supposed terrorists from 15,000 miles away. Well, we're going to come back to it a little later. I'm not going to give a lot of time to the real terrorists in America. I will name a few of them because they're in the news. But I want to talk about the fact that I'll put out here up front. Not all police officers, churchmen, average white people in America, and politicians are terrorists or on the side of supporting American terrorism. They never have been, and I don't expect they ever will be. I know a bunch of people across all sectors that are not involved. But in the same sentence, we have to also say that all Black people are not just criminals waiting to be killed and bodies just waiting to be policed at the same time. If you expect me to accept the one, then I need you to accept the other part. If you want me to accept that all lives matter, then I need to see to the mainline denominations of America that still are more segregated than anything else in American life. And I need to see police officers, and I need to see politicians, and I need to see average white people respecting the fact that if all lives matter, then Black people cannot just be people whose lives are shed down to the ground and it's justified. If all lives matter, then Black lives matter. But that's not what we are seeing right now, is it? People are trying to justify the murder of George Floyd. People are trying to justify the murder of Breonna Taylor. People are trying to justify the paralyzing of Jacob Blake. I spoke with a gentleman today. If you should happen to see this, the only reason I discoursed with you is because I already knew that I was going to further this conversation. Who is still trying to justify, we have to investigate what our eyes have seen. The man was shot 7 times in the back. If there had been a weapon in his hand or a gun found in his hand, it would have been reported by now. So we don't have to do a lot of investigation. This is the same kind of investigation that the Pharisees of the Bible, who were very religious people, would investigate Jesus' miracles, trying to find a reason why they could convince other people not to believe that Jesus who was he said he was. People who try to get you to disbelieve what your own eyes can see and count because they will not be convinced by any evidence that the unjust killing of people that they don't want around is not justified, or that their place in society justifies the need to do this. Let me tell you how far back in history this goes. The Fugitive Slave Act was put on in 1850. I will leave a link in the chat, in the comments, about the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, whereby the entire federal government and the entire United States law enforcement apparatus was thereby bound to go and return escaping slaves to their masters. But see, black people fit a description, meaning that free black people could be harassed by federal law enforcement and local law enforcement at any time. 1850, from sea to shining sea, for 10 good years, actually even through the war, even though obviously it wasn't enforced during the Civil War, but for 10 good years, law enforcement got into the habit of harassing black life from sea to shining sea, because you fit a description. And if you've heard about the movie 12 Years a Slave, what you find out is that people who were actually free black people, who were the children of slaves, who had escaped before the law took place, could also be packed up and sent back south if they fit a description, into slavery. This is why Robert E. Lee's troops considered themselves returning contraband to its rightful owners when they went up into Gettysburg and took black people out of their homes there to return them to slavery. Of course, the Lord corrected Robert E. Lee and his troops by July 4th, 1863, by the losing of the Battle of Gettysburg. Put a pin there too. I'm going to come back to it. But first, let me talk about the heroes. We have this narrative that only certain people in America are allowed to be heroes. And we have this narrative that only certain people are criminals and thugs and spreaders of disease. Okay, well, let me talk about the heroes that you don't know about, because you went to schools that only justified certain heroes. And they didn't even tell you about those heroes, that the reason certain of them had time to write the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence was that the black people who put in the labor that started this country out were out there picking and growing and picking their tobacco and having the labor beat, raped, and murdered out of them, and their children and grandchildren terrorized so they would never think that they could come out of slavery. James Madison, Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson, especially because for 36 years, he also was able to have Sally Hemings' sons grow up and not be able to defend their mother against 36 years of his using the position to have sexual access to her. What do you think her sons felt like? What do you think the family of the man who had to have his teeth pulled so George Washington could have a new set of teeth, what do you think they felt like? If you can imagine that, you can imagine Philando Castile's 4-year-old daughter with her father shot down for no reason. He even disclosed that he had the weapon and he wasn't reaching for it when he was shot. What do you think the brother of his daughter and his daughter are going through today, having seen that? What do you think Jacob Blake's sons are going through? This terrorism against black people and their families has been going on since the founding. But do you know about the heroes of black life that have been going on since the founding? Like I said, if somebody was not going on and growing Jefferson, Madison, and Washington's tobacco, they would not have had money to have time to go do the founding of the country. Beyond that, do you know that the first man to give his life for the United States to be a free country was a black man, Crispus Attucks? Do you know that Paul Revere did not do his ride alone, that there were 3 riders and a major leg was completed by a black man? Do you know that Peter Salem, who was at Bunker Hill, who's painted as a little scared slave in the corner, was actually involved and was a hero at Bunker Hill? So from the founding, I got 3 men for you already. Black people that made this country what it is and fought for its freedom. You have black founding fathers in this country that you don't even know about. And I say that to everybody because that's not taught in school. Because the faces of heroes seem to always have to be white, and the black ones are suppressed. We're going to keep going. Do you know who Abraham Lincoln and Ulysses S. Grant said were their 1/10 of their best troops? And if there's anyone in the South who doesn't want to hear this, y'all already know who handed the movie Glory is about the United States colored troops that handed the Confederacy its head in 1864 at Fort Wagner. The best troops of 1/10 of the Union Army was the United States colored troops. And both Abraham Lincoln and Ulysses S. Grant said they were the best, the most disciplined, the best fighters. And this continued through World War One and World War Two, where black men were acknowledged to be the best and to be upholding the legacy of freedom in every war since the Civil War. Veterans. I know a three-time war veteran, Vietnam veteran, who not only served his country 3 times, came back home, became a hero to his community, to his entire family, took members of his family that were on hard times and put them all indoors. When his parents were thrown off the plantation, they could learn because the Southern planters who owned it. By the way, this didn't happen in 1860. This happened in the 1970s. Threw him off the land because they were no more good to him. This man put his parents indoors, several of his brothers and sisters. This is an American hero. I will say his name. Deacon Rufus Abercrombie of Bethel Missionary Baptist Church is an American hero. They have always existed. There have always been black men who have been heroes to this nation. But see, when we talk about let's get around the flag and let's, venerate old glory and let's celebrate the country's heroic history, these people are never mentioned. Do you know that the reason that there were gas masks available to protect men from mustard gas in World War One, and that those same masks could be adjusted to protect people in the 1918 pandemic, was because of black man Garrett A. Morgan, who also is the reason why when you come into the stoplight, there's a light there that has 3 lights, including that yellow caution light that gives you a chance to slow down. Garrett A. Morgan. Do you know that Thomas Edison would have made 10,000 attempts to invent the light bulb that's in here if Lewis Latimer, black man, hadn't figured out that tungsten was what was going to provide a good filament? Do you know that? The fact that you have light in your house after dark? Black man, Lewis Latimer. Look it up. Do you know that the fact that blood plasma can be used today to treat COVID-19 is owed to a black man, Charles Drew, who figured out how to do transfusions and blood typing in a way that would be helpful to people? Black man, saving lives to this day. Do you know that Breonna Taylor would have been on the front lines but defending her community and maybe perhaps you from COVID-19, from dying of COVID-19, if she'd been not murdered in her bed by American terrorism that people keep justifying? Do you know that she was an essential worker? She wasn't a criminal. She was in bed getting ready for her next day's work. Do you know that every time you look at the shoes that you have up in your house, if you have more than one pair and you set the soles of your shoe down to go to the car, to drive to the corner where Garrett A. Morgan, black man, gave you safety, is because of black man Jan Mexinger, who invented the Mexican process by which we can put soles on shoes inexpensively, and therefore they have put soles on the shoes of every American since the 1910s, including all heroes of all colors that fought in all wars, would not be able to have cheap, affordable shoes were it not for a black man, Jan Mexinger. See, certain people want to make my color of skin and darker the face of all evil in America. But in reality, when we justify the killing of black men because they're all supposed to be you are denying the truth that a lot of the heroes of America that are still serving you to this day are black men. And we are shedding the blood of their sons and daughters down to the ground and traumatizing the daughters and sons of those heroes. And people keep justifying it, but there is a reason for this. Let's talk about the nexus of terrorism. At no time in American history did any but 3 denominations of Europeanized churches stand up against slavery. 3. The Quakers, the Mennonites, the Amish. Now the Amish are unique in that when they came here, they decided that the way that they weren't going to be involved with it was that they didn't get involved. They found American society too decadent for themselves and their children to join. So they stayed out of having an interest in further destruction of the Native American and the further benefit of all the free labor that was coming out of the American South through cotton and tobacco and sugar and many other things. They stayed out of it by staying out of it. To this day, they do not participate in the corruption of the society. I have a lot of respect for the Amish people. The more I study it, the more respect I have for that reason. Just 3. Every other major denomination went along with it. Now, that's really not a surprise when you understand that the Roman Emperor Constantine, so you talk about Roman and Greek imperialism, this was a system that made everyone on the earth a barbarian if they didn't happen to be born Romans, that doomed them to have to learn the cultural ways of the Greeks and the Romans, but would never allow them the rights to take their names, their cultures, their habits, and to Hellenize them, to turn them into Greeks. That was their, but you did all this, but you would never be allowed to be part of a society. The Roman Emperor Constantine made Christianity the state church and corrupted his version. Now, the real Christianity still has always existed. But I'm not just picking on the Roman Catholic Church because the Church of England, you ever wonder why Spain and England had that fight with the Armada and all the rest of it, that big fight? They were fighting for control of whose navies would control the seas, but what they didn't tell you was that who would control the seas and therefore control the slave trade. The Church of England went along with it. And how far down does that go? The two most famous Confederate generals, Robert E. Lee was a lifelong practicing Episcopalian, which is just the Church of England on the American side, and Stonewall Jackson was a practicing Presbyterian, and both of them were very devout. So, how long has the American church been justifying this? Most of your founding fathers, if they weren't deists, a lot of them were Episcopalians, members of the Church of England on this side of the water. Churches did not stand up, not a denomination, except Quakers, the Mennonites, the Amish. That's it. They've always justified the brutalization of black people in America. Always. And many of their offshoots today, you notice they're very quiet. They've always been quiet. Martin Luther King called them on being quiet. I'm just adding to the call, but they've, as a unit, they've supported this. Now, not everybody in these churches, of course, and not even every church. But go back to 1866. The KKK, America's oldest domestic terrorism organization, now has a 501c3. But that makes sense because if you go back and you read through the history of the Southern churches, including the Southern Baptist, that's not a problem because they were all members. Now, so there's a nexus. Consider this. Jacob Blake was shot in the back for a weapon no one can prove was in his hand. Kyle Rittenhouse in Kenosha shot two people at a protest and was let to walk right by with an AR-15, and had just killed two people who were there on the street. The police let him pass right by. Those police officers, we have to say, are part of the nexus of terrorism. Not all, but their attitude there demonstrates who they're with. Same thing, Dylan Roof shot 9 human beings. The police took him by Burger King before taking him into custody. We have to conclude that they are part of the nexus of terrorism also. Because as George W. Bush taught us, if you support it, you're part of it. The Bible teaches that as well. There are certain people you're not even supposed to give a good morning to because you become a partaker in their evil deeds when you do that. George W. Bush said something that he was the right-wing darling candidate of the year, the 2000 to 2008, said something that people do not mind having applied to Iraqis. You know, quote unquote dark-skinned, quote unquote Arabic-speaking terrorists, quote unquote, although the Iraqis actually had nothing to do with Osama bin Laden, that was a lie. But be that as it may, he attempted to intimidate our allies by telling them you're either with us or with a terrorist. Do you know that as a freedom-loving person in America, you have the right to say that to anybody that justifies the unjust murders of black people in America? They're not going to like it as much as when George W. Bush was saying that about being able to go and kill dark-skinned terrorists 15,000 miles away. The people in this country who would let Kyle Rittenhouse, Dylan Roof slide, Timothy McVeigh was eventually apprehended. No one wants to talk about the real faces of terrorism because it looks too much like their brothers and sons. So if you're a member of the 150 million strong majority community, the people who do school shootings look a whole lot more like your sons than they do like me. Dylan Roof, Kyle Rittenhouse, the men in Charlottesville that killed Heather Heyer look a whole lot more like you than they do like me or any black man on the corner. So black people, you can look in the hero and be like, you know, our story is not all thugs and criminals. No, there are heroes that look like us. Get your life together. If you don't have your life together, get it together. Stop justifying the narratives that people have made up about you that say your life is expendable. Get your life together, because you have a record of heroes to live up to from the founding of this nation until now. No, you didn't learn it in school. None of us did. We didn't learn it in school, but learn about your history. Learn who your people really are. The heroes of America from the founding down to the present day. Anybody who gets blood plasma to get over COVID-19 has Charles Drew, a black man, to thank. That's just one example. Learn about who your people are and begin to walk in the statue that you have. You are not America's leftovers. You are also the children of America's founders and builders. Yes, you are. From every piece of tobacco, cotton, and sugar that was ever grown, up to anybody getting blood plasma or puts the sole of their shoe on the ground today, goes to the corner where there's a stoplight, or has a light bulb in their house that burns brightly for days, weeks, months, and sometimes even years. Your people provided that. And for everybody else who wants to talk about criminality, when you justify the murder of Breonna Taylor, you justify the crippling of Jacob Blake, you justify you need the murder of George Floyd. Let me also say something else. Kyle Rittenhouse is 17 years old. Dylan Roof is maybe 23. Amber Geiger, who shot a black man in his own house eating ice cream, is 31. Which means that we have parents of these people who, watching parts of the nation move toward less brutalization of black people, Latino people, Native people, Asian people, were teaching their children. See, every time something happens to a black person, we want to go find out about, was he from a single mother home, and blah, 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 blah. Well, where are Mr. and Mrs. Rittenhouse? Where are Mr. and Mrs. Roof? How is it that the community that's supposed to be morally superior keeps pooping out terrorist spawn? Yes, I said it just like that. Because this is the thing. American history talks one way. Black people are always put on all the evil that happens in society. But no one says, go look in the mirror and look at Kyle Rittenhouse. Go look in the mirror and look at Dylan Roof. Go look in the mirror and look at Timothy McVeigh. Go look in the mirror and go look at school shootings. Go look at your sons and your daughters and look at all these people. Do they look like me? No, they don't. With very few exceptions, the people who do mass killings do not look like me. There are a few exceptions. Christopher Dorner comes to mind. But that's pretty much the entire 21st century accounted for. You want to look at the real face of terrorism? Then you need to get a hold of the people around you who continue to justify and give cover. Because remember, it was George W. Bush, that right-wing darling, who said, you're either with us or with the terrorists. You are either on the rights of everyone, to the equal rights and protection and the prosperity of this country, or you're on the side of the people that are not. But when you go look at what the real face of terrorism is in this country, it does not look like African-American meat. It is, as right-wing darling Donald Trump said, you go back and you read the history. It is what it is. You need extra backup? Go ask any Native American who survived. You can go ask living Native Americans how they were taken from their parents and forced into Indian schools, and their language and their culture taken away from them to try to assimilate to a culture that would never accept them, that had wiped their ancestors out from coast to coast. If you don't want to hear it from me, there are Native Americans who went through this. Like Deacon Abercrombie's family was brutally thrown off the plantation they had spent their entire lives working on because they were too old to work. That was the 1970s. You can talk to Native Americans who were going through this in the 60s and the 70s. The Tuskegee experiment, 1932 to 1972. People in this society were giving black men syphilis to see what it would do to them down to 1972. Jacob Blake was killed this week. Or at least we found out about it this week. This is still going on. And people are still... I talked to somebody today, like I said, who wants to get into my private messages and convince me of Pat Lynch's view that all the protest against this is just a left-wing trick. No, Karl Marx Communist Manifesto wasn't even translated into English in the United States when the Fugitive Slave Act that allowed law enforcement across the country to harass black people and to send them back into slavery was written. Karl Marx's ideas didn't get traction here until like the 1880s, 1890s, at which time black people had gotten up and actually killed Confederate soldiers for their freedom in 1864. It had nothing to do with Karl Marx. It has to do with the fact that you don't have the problem that we have is with James Madison, who decided to write, who said to his letter to the people of New York that we now call the Federalist Papers number 10, that I'm going to create a constitution that will keep everybody factionalized so they will never be able to get together and question the better and best sort of people about their having all the benefits of America. The man actually wrote that out 60 good years before Karl Marx actually wrote anything. Okay? That's the problem. That the people who founded this country, and by the way, they weren't even talking about black people. When they talked about the worst sort of people, they were talking about poor white people. James Madison, Thomas Jefferson, and George Washington despised poor white people's living ancestors today almost as much as they despise my ancestors. I'm sorry. This is facts. Go read it. Now, I'd have to say, as I wind down, I have to say something special to the Christians listening to me. This Bible, a lot of you are ignorant of it completely. Because if you weren't, you wouldn't get out here and justify the things that you do. I have told you, and I am leaving in the comments, things that are true. How the Fugitive Slave Act is the beginning of law enforcement unjustly harassing black bodies and black lives. Coast to coast, from sea to shining sea. It's not all the South. This went on all over the place. How this habit came and black people can go and take life and liberty from black people. Police officers can do this at will. Not all of them are doing it, but the justification goes back that far at least. I'm not even talking about the Southern slave patrols that still kept patrolling after Jim Crow. But the Bible says those puts a special curse on those who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. Karl Marx is not the reason that you have these protests, because this struggle started before then. It predates Karl Marx's work being in America. So stop telling that lie. You now know that's not the reason this is happening. And I'm not saying they're not Marxists involved at this point, but that's not the core of this happening. You keep telling that lie. And the Bible the God that you say you worship has said, if you continue to suppress the truth and unrighteousness, he got something for you. I have another thought for you. So you're going to suppress the truth and unrighteousness. Okay. Do you know what the Lord did to ancient Israel? Ancient Israel was his own chosen nation. There were two things that they were doing that are on the list of the reasons why the Lord put their nation into captivity. They were oppressing their poor. And on one good day, it's in the book of Jeremiah, they refused to let their slaves go out free with what they should have had to go out with. And the Lord said, since you will not release them to be free, I will release my nation from my protection and allow you to go into captivity. Now, if the Lord would do that to his own chosen people in ancient Israel, you don't think that those of you who are Christians who always find a way for a black person to end up dead, and because we're all supposed to be a threat to the nation, even though demonstrably to American history that's not true, you think the United States is going to escape? I have a couple words for you to consider. Did you notice that the Lord closed the American church entirely for a few months this year? You think that was an accident? You don't think that you two were getting a wake-up call? You don't think that Jerry Falwell's son, Jerry Falwell Jr., getting exposed like this, after all this self-righteous conversation that he's been having, you don't think that you ought to pay attention to that? You don't think the story of Robert E. Lee, devout Christian life between 1857 and 65 should not give, or actually 1870, you don't think the way the Lord, the real master, took the whip hand to this man's life should not be a cautionary tale? Really? You don't think that there's going to be a generation of Christian people who look a little bit more like me, who are going to look at this You don't think that the Lord had Eli in the Bible who let his sons terrorize the people bringing their offerings to the temple? And he let Eli live to be 98 to see God write Ichabod. It's in 1 Samuel, go read it. To write Ichabod over the whole nation for 20 years. You don't think the same God doesn't change? You don't think he might have something to say about this to the United States of America? The real face of terrorism. If you are justifying the killing of black people, that means that the real face of terror will continue to be your sons and grandsons. Maybe not your direct sons and grandsons, but that'll be what it is. Meanwhile, black people, we come from heroes. We got our bad people too, don't get me wrong, but the story's only been told one way. Father John was a mentor to his younger brother Brant and a mentor to the people that he ministered to. Breonna Taylor was an essential worker who would have been on the front line right now. George Floyd was a father. Jacob Blake is a father. These are all people who are valued to their community. And their lives have been taken away or altered forever by a country that literally will have law enforcement who will harass black people but let white criminals with AR-15s who just murdered someone in front of them walk away or take them to Burger King. This is the country in which we live, but you as a black person can still be a hero to those around you. One more thing, and this is for all freedom-loving people. There are two things that you can do. Because remember, George W. Bush told us, you're with us or you're with the terrorists. You got two choices only. Remember? A right-winger said this. I don't want to hear any argument about it on my wall. That was a right-wing man that said that. Check the people around you that justify that always have to find a reason why that black person should have ended up dead. Just check them. Check them hard. And don't give them the privilege of having all kinds of extra dialogue. Either they understand it or they don't. Tell them what they need to know, let them go. Second of all, look at the media. Do what these athletes have done. Now, they've gone back to work today. They got families to feed. I wish they'd stayed out a little bit longer. But do what they've done. Walk away from giving aid and comfort to people who will justify your son, your brother, your cousin, or you lying in the middle of the street dead and find reasons why that should have happened, instead of looking at this person was shot in the back, this person had a knee on their neck for 9 minutes. Walk away from making people comfortable who think that's okay, black people. That's not how heroes behave. We don't justify people who do unjust murder. If you are a white person and you're interested in doing right, you don't justify what our eyes have all seen. You don't find a way to justify people being killed unjustly. Doesn't matter what color they are. But today, we're talking about Jacob Blake. Today, we're talking about George Floyd. Today, we're talking about Breonna Taylor. Today, we're talking about Ahmaud Arbery. Today, we're talking about Walter Scott, Philando Castile, and many others who have been unjustly taken from this earth or having their livelihood and their ability to work to keep themselves taken from them because somebody wanted to uphold the legacy of the United States 401-year history of domestic terrorism. Either you're with us or you're with those terrorists. You're either giving aid and comfort to those that want freedom, or you're giving aid and comfort to those that want the terrorism to continue. Now, like I said, shout out to Terrence Amen, because I was not going to talk about my fictional book, Black and White and Red All Over, today. But you know what? I guarantee you this. Fiction comes out of where we are, and it imagines the world as it could be. And in the world that I want people to understand we could all live in together if we choose to, there are no good cops who are going to walk people do terrorist acts and let them walk right by. When the nexus of average people, the church, and rogue police officers and politicians rears its ugly head in this book, I guarantee you no one's going to Burger King before going to prison. That's No one's going to pass by with an AR-15 and have to be apprehended the next day. Ironwood Hamilton doesn't play that. Shout out to all the good police officers that refused to kill a black person on sight when they were called by white folks that wanted them killed, when they were barbecuing, when they were bird watching. Shout out for all the police officers who actually do understand that they are not here to continue America's legacy of terrorism. There are many. I know several. Unfortunately, life is harder for police officers. I had someone send me Pat Lynch's speech, the New York Police Association, and why they're supporting Donald Trump. And I actually did feel sorry for him in a way, because every police officer in this country now know what it's like to be a black man minding your own business and be harassed because you fit a description. Every police officer in this country, because of people like Derek Chauvin, fit a description now. And that's not fair to those police officers. But it's also not fair that black people can be minding their own business. Jacob Blake was trying to break up a fight and help his community. Can be paralyzed or killed for no reason, but they just happen to be black, and some white terrorist wanted to shoot them down. We're going to start calling these things what they are. In my book, I didn't know this was going to happen in 2020 when I wrote it in 2019. But we're going to start calling these things what they are. If you don't like it, if you're uncomfortable with it, maybe you should be. Maybe you should be uncomfortable enough to stop giving aid and comfort to people that want to justify every time they shoot a black man in the street. Maybe you should be uncomfortable. And let me guarantee you something else. Come on my wall and argue with me if you want to. There are at least 2 people on Facebook today that'll find out. That's not going to go well for you. It's not. I will take you from the founding to the present day and educate you on your ignorance. We're not going to do this anymore. I leave you with the wisdom of George W. Bush. America has a long history of domestic terrorism against black people, native people, Asian, Latinos. Long, long history. Black people especially. The Bible itself actually says when you condone somebody's evil deeds, you become part of them. So that I can quote the wisdom of George W. Bush. You're either with us, people who are fighting for the freedom and the equal rights of all people, or you are with the terrorist. And as the white-winged darling Donald Trump said, it is what it is. For those of you who are going to have a good weekend standing up for freedom, you have a good weekend. The rest of you, get your lives together. Stop supporting America's long history of domestic terrorism. Stop it.